It's an interesting circumstance occurring here in 2 Kings chapter 17. It was customary that when a nation might go in and win battle over someone, that they might, rather than just take captives and put them in some kind of prison form, if you will, they would actually simply displace them. They would take them and move them into some other region of which they were unfamiliar and let them reside there in that way, in hopes that they might be able to at least keep them distracted from building up power and influence again, because they're trying to learn how to live and survive in a new culture or in a new area. And that's kind of what's happened here in 2 Kings chapter 17. And people that were not familiar with that region had been placed there by the king of Assyria, and now there's challenge because they don't know anything about what the God of that land, which is Jehovah, what He would desire from them. And so they don't respect or fear Him at all. And so lions come into the land and begin to create havoc, as you could only imagine, as it relates to the people that were there. And so, as was you and I would probably do, they start beginning to try to find an answer to this. What challenge or what manner can we overcome this difficulty or challenge of these lions roaming around, slaying whomever they would, and recognizing that the problem really resided in the fact that they know not the manner of the God of the land. They didn't know enough about Jehovah as to how they should behave, how they should worship, how they should function in the land that really belonged to Him. And so this morning, if you would, let's just take a little bit of time and share some thoughts that we can learn from this experience that they're going through, and maybe some of their mistakes as it relates to it, and maybe we can appreciate some education from this narrative this morning. I want you to recognize first and foremost that there's fear and then there's fear. And what I simply mean by that is there is a fear of being eaten by a lion, and there is fear in meaning of respect and admiration and in awe of the Creator. Their fear rested with simply the idea that they didn't want to be attacked by these lions that were roaming around the land, but they really didn't elevate that fear to have any real respect for Jehovah God. Friends, sometimes we may get scared by the circumstances that we find ourselves in life. Tragedy strikes, hurt strikes, some difficulty, a pandemic arrives. Whatever it might be, there may be various things in life that bring us to be scared of the environment or circumstances that we're in. But that doesn't always result in a genuine fear of the Creator. The real fear that means something is a genuine respect for God. Just notice with me as we kind of bounce back and forth in 2 Kings chapter 17 a little bit this morning. Look at verse 32. He said, "So they heard the Lord," or rather they feared the Lord, "and from every class they appointed for themselves priests of the high places, who sacrificed for them in the shrines of the high places. They feared the Lord, yet served their own gods." That's not going to work. It's not really a fear. All they're afraid of is that God that was the God of this land apparently has sent lions, and I don't want to be eaten by a lion, so I fear Him in respect to that. But they really didn't have any legitimate respect for Jehovah because they didn't change their pattern of behavior. They claimed a fear of God, Jehovah God, but yet still served worship, sacrifice to their own gods, according to the rituals of the nations from among whom they were carried away. They brought their religious practices with them when they came, and they're trying to figure out how it is that they should behave in this new land that they've been brought into. And certainly a fear of the lions roaming around, but they're still worshiping and sacrificing and honoring the gods that they had brought with them. In verse 41, at the very conclusion of this chapter, notice he said, "So these nations feared the Lord, yet served their carved images. Also their children and their children's children have continued doing as their fathers did even to this day." Friends, it's one thing to say, "I love God." It's another thing to love God. It's one thing to say, "I fear God. I fear what He could do to me." And it's another thing to say, "I fear Him in terms of I respect Him enough to do what His will and purpose for me is." I think we need to understand that there's a difference between that, and we get that out of this narrative here in 2 Kings chapter 17. On one breath, they were trying to claim that they had a level of fear for the God of that land, but their behaviors in worship and religious practices didn't change. They're still establishing priests from whatever order they had chosen. They're still sacrificing in the high places. They're still adapting and adopting all of the religious practices that they had brought from their other lands. They needed to recognize that they were creating greater challenges for themselves because there was not a legitimate respect for Jehovah. In verse 34, if you notice with me, bounce backwards, to this day they continue practicing the former rituals. Say one thing, completely do another. They continue to practice the former rituals. They do not fear the Lord. There's the reality, the writer says. One breath, yes, we fear Him, but their practice shows something different. My question for us simply this morning is this: do I want to be somebody who says they love God? Do I want to be somebody who says the kinds of statements that make me appear to be religious? Or do I want to be a faithful follower and child of the God of heaven? Do I want to be a legitimate follower and disciple of Jesus the Christ? Do I want to just say the right things, or do I want to live, behave, and act in the right ways? Because that was their problem. They said some of the right things, but at the end result simply was there was no real fear going on among those people because they didn't change anything as it relates to the Creator. Friends, there's a necessity for proper fear. If you want to take that thin tassel in your Bible and mark it in 2 Kings chapter 17, we'll come back there in a minute, but jump over to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. I want you to notice just some principles about fear, proper fear, and respect for God that the New Testament writers share with us. Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. Jesus speaking in this moment says, "And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear Him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." What's the point Jesus is trying to make? Proper fear is a recognition that God is supreme over all things. Not just the fact that He had the ability to send some lions into the land that threatened their physical bodies, but they needed to appreciate that He was the God of their whole self. Jesus is trying to get the folks in the New Testament times to appreciate that as well. Don't just fear what man can do to you. Don't fear what the temporary earth might bring to us. Don't fear the things that we live in and reside in the temporary. The real fear and respect needs to be towards Jehovah, who has power and control over both of those elements. Both the temporary, the earthly, and the eternal, the heavenly. That's where I'll never be able to say real and fear today. Just mark it down. I'm going to have to find, anybody got a thesaurus on them? I'm going to have to find a new word. You understand the point I'm making. Run to Acts chapter 10. Let's note just one more quick verse as it relates to this principle. Acts chapter 10, verse 34. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, "In truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, whoever fears Him and," connector word, "whoever fears Him and works righteousness is accepted by Him." Friends, is that not exactly what they didn't do back there in 2 Kings chapter 17? They feared because of the dangers, but they didn't respect Him enough to do righteousness. I'm challenging all of us this morning to fear Him enough because what He can do to me if He chose to, but let that motivate and move me to act in behaviors and choices that are righteous in His eyes. Jesus taught, the apostles taught, the writers record for us the desire from God that we do both of those things. It's not enough to just simply say, I'm afraid of God or what He can do to me, but it's another level to say, who fears Him and works righteousness. Let that fear compel and move me to do what is right in the eyes of God. Because sometimes fear in times of trouble should actually educate us. It shouldn't just be a fallback, right? Things are good, I don't even think about God. Things are bad, now I want to turn to Him. Lions show up in the land. Now all of a sudden I'm interested in what the God of this land has to say. Sometimes fear should educate us in better ways and not just look at God as something to fall back on when the challenges seem to be perplexing. Notice with me verse 25 back in 2 Kings chapter 17. And it was so at the beginning of their dwelling there that they did not fear the Lord, and therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which killed or slew some of them. So they spoke to the king of Assyria, saying, the nations whom you have removed and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the rituals of the God of the land. I want you to stop and think about that for a minute. Their religious concept was that you could ritualistically appease the gods. If I do the right rituals, I will appease the gods, and I don't know what the rituals of the God of this land are. That's a mistake. The fear that they had was correct in that they should be afraid of a God who can send lions in that's slaying a lot of them. But what did it educate them? It should not have educated them, give me a couple of pattern rituals that I can fulfill and so I can appease this God so maybe the lions will go away. The real thought process should have been, what does this God want from me? What behavior, what lifestyle, what cultural changes do we need to make? What do we need to do in order to honor and respect the God of this land? But they wanted a quick fix. Give us some rituals of the God of the land. Therefore he sent lions among them, and indeed they are killing them because they do not know the rituals of the God of the land. If our religion, if our convictions are ritualistic, then we've missed the point. If we're just about ritualistic kinds of things, we do certain things at certain times in certain ways, and that's the extent of my religious behavior, that's the extent of my religious conclusions, then I'm no different than these folks that are sitting here in Samaria in 2 Kings chapter 17. I'm no better than them if my mindset is always about just the ritualistic pattern things that I can focus upon and see. Now I realize sometimes they're the most tangible. I'm saddened that we're kind of coming back to some of these thoughts. You know, early in the pandemic, way back when, we had some conversations and we thought maybe we had turned a corner on some of that, and now we're kind of coming back to some of the same kinds of things. But I think it's worth reminding ourselves of that we have done this. We have created, not necessarily purposefully or even noticeably in the sense that we were specific about enumerating them, but we have become ritualistic at times in our service to God. Let's just be honest about that. And I think what kind of brought that out in my mind more than anything was our idea that coming into assemblies was almost the only thing that really mattered as it relates to my Christian practice. Now, side note, disclaimer, worship matters. Assemblies matter. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Honoring God collectively matters. It all matters, okay? But it is not the only indicator of the faith and quality of life as it relates to my service to God. We've done that. I don't know that we've tried to necessarily write a list of, but we've done that. We have labeled people's faith totally based on how many times they come in a building. And that's not the only measure. It's not the only thing that matters. It matters, but it's just not the only thing that matters. And we're not going to become people of better faith solely because we raise the quantity of times that we gather together. What's the purpose of that gathering? How effective were we in that purpose? What was the meaning of that particular? What were we trying to accomplish with that service? All of those things are relevant and necessary in order for it not to become ritualistic. If it's just come in the building, go home, come in the building, go home, come in the building, go home. If it's only about quantity, it's not helping us. It's about purpose and reason and motive, what we're accomplishing within that worship and honoring God and all of those things. That's how you avoid the ritualistic approach. That's how we avoid the consequences of that ritualistic approach. They didn't learn anything here. All they wanted to know was, give us a couple of practices we can do. Can we add an extra service in? If we add an extra service in, will it appease the God of this land? That's what they're asking. And it didn't work. Because it wasn't real fear. All it was give me something to help this God get rid of these lions. And that's not what he was looking for. Uh-oh. This could be interesting. Is it changing back there? No. This could be real interesting because I got nothing in front of me. Hey, Hunter, tap that other keyboard for a minute. Hit the right arrow key. I should have printed it. I thought we had this fixed. Not doing anything. Pause you for 1 second. My apologies. I'll start printing it. I'm not going there, Mike. I'm going back in that room. Everybody at home, keep reading 2 Kings chapter 17. I'll be back with you in a second. What'd you do, Hunter? It froze somehow. Wish I understood this thing. Gary, I'm making an executive decision to replace that computer back there, by the way. All right. Thank you for your patience. Let's look at 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 28. What that tells me, by the way, is you may want to have a songbook handy, too, when we get to the singing part. 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 28. Then one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and dwelt in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. So, teach us some rituals that will allow us to appease this God of the land. So go get us a priest that knows a little bit of something about it, and let him educate us and teach us about what it is maybe that we should be able to do. The problem is that form without meaning wasn't going to help them. He could come and teach them a few practices, but it wouldn't help them if they didn't have any real respect and fear of Jehovah. In 2 Kings chapter 17, look at verses 33 and 34 again. So they get a priest to come and educate them. And all it resulted in was they feared the Lord, yet served their own gods. Continuing in the rituals of the practices of the nations they were carried away from. To this day, they continue practicing the former rituals. We read that verse earlier. It didn't matter. The priest could come and teach them everything that the law had to say. The priest could come and give them every ounce of what education he could as it relates to the sacrifices of the land or whatever it might be. But if they weren't going to change their disposition about Jehovah, it wouldn't mean anything. Form without meaning is nothing. My question, friends, for us simply this morning is, religiously, do I want form or substance? Do I want it to mean something, or do I just want to go through some ritualistic practices and hope that that'll be okay? Let me share with you a couple Psalms. Psalm 138. Psalm 138, verse 1. I want you to just think about the statements the psalmist made. David on this occasion. I will praise you with what? I will praise you with my whole heart. That's important. Praising God without the heart is not praise. That's what the psalmist is trying to imply and help us understand. Form could be perfectly accurate. Our acts of worship could fit exactly the New Testament form, but without the whole heart, it's just as meaningless as if we had done something contrary to those authoritative practices. My point, friends, is that I won't point you out. It'll be okay. I'm broke now. I got to stop. I was in a gospel meeting up in Moundsville years ago, and there was a cell phone going off, and it perturbed the gospel meeting preacher. And you could tell it was bugging him. It was bothering him. He was kind of scanning the crowd. He was ready to pounce, and then he realized it was coming from his own pocket. Preacher beware, right? Preacher be cautious. You can pounce and jump, and then sometimes you can be guilty of the very same thing. So it happens. It's okay. But turn them off now. You've been warned. So he says, I will praise you with my whole heart. Substance, right? Substance. I'll praise you with my whole heart. Substance. Not just the pattern. Because if we're going to worship and try to worship God without the heart, then we might as well do it however we want to do it. We might as well use whatever practices we deem, because without the heart, it's meaningless anyway. And so let's worship Him. It's interesting language that the psalmist used when he says, before the gods I will sing praises to you. That's not a condoning that idea. What he's trying to say within the poetic psalm is, I'm singing to you. All those other gods these people have created, my praises are going straight to you. Psalm 146, verse 1. Psalm 146, verse 1. Again, the same kind of sentiment, but praise the Lord, oh my soul. From within my very being, from within my whole heart, within my soul, I want to praise, honor, and worship God. Not ritualistic, not just by form, not just trying to make sure I've got the right authoritative act, but I want to make sure the heart and soul is behind it, because I know God wants more from me than just rituals. He wants me to honor Him and serve Him. I'm making an executive decision, Gary. I'm now replacing the sound system next week. Oh. Can we just, I'm putting up a tent next week, and we're going outside, and we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. Okay. Yeah. So here's what they tried to do. They tried to compromise. And the simple point, friends, is simply this. God doesn't want compromise. He wants you. He doesn't want you to strike deals with Him. He's not looking for you to create some kind of consensus with Him. He wants your whole heart, your whole life. He wants your soul and your mind, everything, dedicated unto Him. Look at verse 41 again. We read it earlier. So these nations feared the Lord, yet served their carved images. And notice what happened. Also, their children and their children's children have continued doing as their fathers did even to this day. Friends, it's contagious. Ritualistic, form pattern service is contagious to the generations that came after them. Your children are doing it. Your children's children are doing it. No one is honoring Jehovah as they should. They're trying to compromise and find secondary answers to the problems. Notice what Jesus said. You know what He said in Matthew chapter 6. He warned us. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24, no one. Write your name down where the word no one is. You want to literally do it, fine, but if you want to but write your name there. You are and I am the no one, okay? Brian cannot serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else He will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot, you will not, you shall not, no one. Those are the words I want you to pick up on. I'm not the exception. They weren't the exception in 2 Kings chapter 17, and I am not the exception in today's world. You cannot do it. We can throw form and ritualistic things at it, but I cannot legitimately serve God and earthly things simultaneously. I cannot worship Him ritualistically and let my heart and soul be somewhere else and expect Him to accept it. You cannot serve two masters. It won't work. It will not work. And too often we don't recognize the challenges that those things present. Spiritual compromise has been around for a long time, and it's never worked. In Luke chapter 14 and verse 26. In Luke chapter 14 and verse 26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Well, that sounds really harsh, by the way, when you first read it, but I want you to notice that he put you in that verse too. And he put me in that verse. And so before you think, well, how awful that sounds to hate brother, to hate sister, to hate mother, father. No, he also said to hate yourself. In what context? In the context that God has to be first above all those people, including self. That's the context of the thought. There's no spiritual compromise that God accepts. He must be the priority. He must be over everyone else, including myself. In verse 33 of the same chapter, Luke chapter 14 still. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Sometimes we're looking for compromise rather than obedience, and it won't work. They were hoping, because they did not know the manners of the God of that land, they were hoping that they could find some kind of spiritual compromise. We'll fear you, but we still want to worship our gods. Oh, we'll fear you, but we're still going to go to the high places and have our own priesthoods and have our own sacrifices and have all our own religious things. We'll still fear you, but we're going to teach our children about the gods of our lands and the gods of our nations, and we're going to continue to hope that our grandchildren will do the same. You see what's happening there? And I think what we need to recognize is that spiritual compromise is contagious as well. I want to say this, and you see the hesitancy because I want to say it in the right way so that you'll receive it in the right way. But if my children witness me spiritually compromised, what will the result of that be? Right? Each generation is going to learn something. So parents, grandparents, be careful. Be careful. Because what our children, what our grandchildren are witnessing in me will become their practice, and maybe even one step further than I went. Away from faithful, dedicated obedience. If they see in me an attempt to compromise with God, an attempt to try to appease Him, an attempt to do a handful of ritualistic, patterned, formed things that seem religious, it won't have the effect we need it to have. I'm not saying that they'll be perfectly faithful just because you strove to be faithful and you tried not to. I'm not saying that it'll be a perfect, but it'll be far better than if they see that inconsistent approach. We were warned by James, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Don't try to spiritually compromise. It simply will not work. And you cannot compromise with your soul's salvation either. You cannot compromise with the hopes and the confidences and the heavenly promises that God has made unto us. They tried to find a path beyond what God had offered them, and it simply wasn't going to work. And man hasn't really changed. God has said, through Jesus, or Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He's taught us that we can't serve two masters. He's taught us that He wants the whole heart and soul behind our worship and service and our respect for God, not just a fear of what God might be able to do. How committed am I? And here's the thing, and I want to say this because I know I've challenged us within the study, but I also want to say this. We got to quit looking at yesterday and looking and saying, well, boy, I wish I'd been stronger in that moment. I wish I'd been more faithful in that moment. I wish I'd made better choices in that moment. You can't erase any of it, right? You can't erase it. We cannot change anything that happened yesterday. But what I can change is my commitment today. And I may have some people in my life that I might have to go to and say, listen, I maybe didn't do what I should have done in that moment. Maybe I wasn't as strong as I should have been, but I'm striving now. I'm committed now. And I hope that you'll appreciate that if you'll commit and you'll stay convicted or you become convicted in your service to God, you'll improve and you'll be better for it as well. So if you're ready to step out into those promises today, erasing from a forgiveness standpoint what happened in the past, and saying, I'm ready to step forward and move forward in my relationship with God, to seek salvation in the blood of the Lamb, or be restored back to your Creator today, if we could help you, strengthen you in those choices, to have obedience and substance and whole heart and soul over any form or ritualistic approach to your service to God, and we could help you make that commitment today, we'd ask you to come while we stand and while we sing.